When was the last time you thought about Luxembourg? Fucking never, that's when. They're mostly known for existing, except for those times that it didn't. I assume you all read the title and you are here to know about those times where it didn't exist, and that's exactly what I'm going to talk about. So the Treaty of London, 1867, guaranteed the tiny nation's independence, but let's be real here, if somebody wanted to rock up and just say this is all mine now, then who the hell would stop them? Turns out the Germans decided to try this out. Twice. Although ironically, in their attempts to stamp out a Luxembourger identity, they ended up just making a stronger one. This is the story of those occupations. In 1914, a little oopsie occurred in Sarajevo, and now all of Europe was on fire. So now Germany had to go and give France a good old seeing to, and to do this, they pull out the Schlieffen Plan, as if it was still the perfect offensive doctrine 10 years after its conception. Unfortunately for Luxembourg, they were a part of this plan, and in the way, so the German army rocked in and took the place over with basically no resistance. Grand Duchess Marie Diacritic and the Prime Minister, Paul Eyschen, were totally aware that they could essentially do nothing, so they reluctantly accepted German military rule in exchange for relative self-government. The Germans allowed the vast majority of the native institutions of Luxembourg to exist through the duration of the war, and honestly, not a whole lot really happened on that front. However, they still did have problems, mainly shortages of shit like what was happening in Germany at the time. This led to a great deal of dissent because people who are hungry generally tend to not like their government. As a result, the first trade unions in the country were born, who then promptly went on strike, followed up by immediately being crushed by the German army because fuck you. Also, Eyschen died. He was extremely popular, so when he croaked, he casually caused like 3 years of political tomfuckery that would take way too long to explain. All you really need to know is that 4 separate governments failed to legitimize themselves, and the Duchess ran to the Germans and cried when things got hairy, which just pissed people off. The only other thing of note was that over 3,000 Luxembourgers would join the French Foreign Legion so that they could fight the Germans, which is cool, I guess. Anyways, the interesting shit mostly comes after the occupation. The Americans would be the ones to liberate the country, and spoiler alert, this wouldn't be the last time. After the war, the Grand Duchess was extremely unpopular with both her own people and people internationally, since she was a little too close with the German monarchy and significantly favored right-wing political parties in her country. There was even a plan to abolish the country and annex it into Belgium, but that never really went anywhere. So the Duchess pussies out and abdicates her throne to her sister Charlotte, who would keep her rule for a long time, even through a funny event that happens in the immediate future. Anyways, there would be a referendum on whether Luxembourg should stay a monarchy, and they even let women vote in this one. They voted to keep it, by the way. They also would vote for more economic ties with Belgium, since the German economic bloc kind of doesn't exist anymore, so they needed to go to somebody. So yeah, the first German occupation brought about a fair bit of change. It got shit on the second one, though. Where the First World War occupation was just that, an occupation, the second was more of an annexation. You see, the angry mustache man had this whole German supremacy idea, making him not only batshit insane, but also kind of a dick. The story begins the same as the first. Germany needs to molest France, so they go around their big dick wall through the Low Countries. Luxembourg was in the way again, and on May 10th, 1940, they were invaded and swiftly occupied. The government wasn't stupid this time, though, so the Grand Duchess took her government and fucked off to Canada, then to the UK to help set up the Luxembourg resistance, which was absolutely a thing. This time around, the Germans didn't bother with the autonomy thing. For all intents and purposes, Luxembourg was abolished and was now a part of Germany. A guy called Gustav Simon was placed in charge, and, being a Nazi, he was also kind of a dick. Nevertheless, he was helped by Luxembourg collaborators. His entire goal was to Germanize the place. Use of French was banned, all aspects of the former Luxembourgish institutions were abolished, and a comical amount of propaganda was directed in an attempt to get people on the side of the Reich. Gustav thought he was hot shit at this time, so he went and organized a census in 1941 in an attempt to show how good of a job he was doing. It simply had 3 questions regarding national, ethnic, and linguistic affiliation. Ironically, the banning of French simply gave a massive uptick to the use of the traditional Luxembourgish language, and the resistance capitalized on this by making some sneaky propaganda of their own to get the people to answer Dreimal Letzburg, meaning 3 times Luxembourgish. This worked very well, and the overwhelming majority of the population answered that way, which was such a petty fuck you to the Nazis, it's amazing. Like I said, all these occupations did was build a Luxembourgish identity built on spite for the Germans. This didn't stop their incorporation, however, and soon they were subject to all the German laws at the time. Last names were forcibly changed to be more German, streets and buildings were renamed, Jews were persecuted, and conscription was enacted in the territory. There were strikes in response, but the Germans crushed them with no mercy. All opposition to any policy was met with brutality, with executions and deportations being commonplace. As well, upwards of 90% of the country's Jewish population would be deported, and the vast majority would be killed. So overall, it was a pretty shit time for everyone involved. However, despite all of this, the people never gave in. Eventually, after 4 years of hellish occupation, who else shows up but good old Uncle Sam? Again. The country was almost fully liberated in the span of a couple days, however the Germans counterattacked in the Battle of Uwu Notices Your Bulge, and so the north of the country was ravaged by heavy fighting. The last town to be liberated would be Vianden in February 1945, where a couple months prior, a group of resistance members had absolutely ganked a Waffen-SS unit in a very mean battle. The country was finally free and had emerged with its own distinct identity intact. As for Gustav, he tried to go into hiding but ended up getting caught and killing himself via severe blunt force trauma, a bullet to the back of the head, and asphyxiation from being hanged. Suicide. Collaborationists were also not treated very well, as they were not in most countries after the war. Over its course, over 5,700 Luxembourgers were killed, which may not seem like a lot, but you have to remember this country is the size of a postage stamp, so comparatively speaking, it's a massive number. Despite this, the nation would survive and has never again been threatened since. So that's the story of German-occupied Luxembourg. Since the country still exists, they obviously survived and emerged stronger. I guess you could spin this as some preachy life lesson about overcoming adversity, but that's boring and reminds me too much of middle school, so fuck that noise. Luxembourg survived off a mixture of spite and testosterone that allowed them to tell the Krauts to go fuck themselves with their Mausers. Overall pretty based if you ask me. Anyways, that about does it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you around.